lunch, let's go to bed. And he was totally serious. He said she's probably only got 2 or 3 weeks. And he said, Mark's aunt has been like that for months.
Yeah.
That she sleeps in all the time.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he left during church because I think he got a call. He told me he was, you know, that might happen. Let's take a minute and pray for him too. Lord, we do lift Kyle to you and the situation with his mother, and I know that's so important to him, and I pray that you would help him to know that you're there for him and to comfort him, and pray that you would help his mother to know you, to draw close to you this time. I know this time comes for everyone, and we're thankful that he has contact with you, and I just pray that you continue to work in his life. In Jesus' name.
We did ask him this morning, I'm sorry, Tony. We did ask him if his mother knew Jesus, and he said she does.
Yeah, he was, I mean, last time when he and I talked about it, he was not ready to say that, like, it was going to be okay, whatever happened with her, but today he was like, I think it's pretty close. And
can I say one thing too?
Anybody else?
I got flyers for Vacation Bible School, so if you know some places you can put some up, see me afterwards. Please, thank you.
That it?
Okay. I just wanted to tell everyone, a lot of you, I guess, from here was here the Wednesday night when I went down to the altar and broke down. Things were really rough at work. It's really rough knowing that my daughter's moving away. I was every day crying, sometimes more than once. And just at that point, I was crying at church, and I just went down to the altar because I know that's what you need to do. I just don't do it soon enough. But since then, I've only cried one day, and I actually have a job offer already. It got offered on the spot, so I mean, God's good.
On the tongue.
The altar should be used more. But sometimes I guess it takes us to be broken to really throw ourselves down for Him. So, He's right there for me.
Praises are always good. Okay. Everybody ready? Okay, I'm going to back about something just a little bit for some to kind of bring everybody up to the same page. But first I want to start with this question then. What does Bethlehem mean? What does the name Bethlehem mean? What?
Birthplace of Jesus.
Well, it is the birthplace of Jesus, but there's a name for it.
House of bread.
House of bread. But what you're saying is, that's where I was going, so you kind of jumped around where I was going. But that's so neat. Our God's plan was house of bread, and the bread of life come from Bethlehem. And so, and that's also where King David came from. That's where Boaz and Ruth began their marriage from Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is also known as Bethlehem, Judah, which means house of bread in the Hebrew. And the addition of Judah distinguishes it from Bethlehem in the territory of Zebulun. Bethlehem and Judah is significant because it was the birthplace of Jesus. And so that's what we know, in the place of where Boaz and Ruth began their marriage and their relationship. Now, last week, we had also a little question about, when we're looking at the family, we're looking at the main players, of course, is Elimelech and Naomi. And Elimelech and Naomi, because the importance of this is, Bethlehem, again, I told you last week, was a very farmable area. It was very rich in agriculture and production, but because a famine had come on Bethlehem, Elimelech and Naomi, he decided to take his family and move to the Moabite area and bring their two sons, and that's where they meet Ruth and Ophrah and Orpha. And so their boys end up marrying those two Moabite women, and that's kind of where the story takes off from there. But because they kind of went out of God's hand by leaving Bethlehem and trusting God, Elimelech ends up getting killed, and along with his two sons, which were married to Ruth and Orpha. And so that's kind of where we take off from tonight. Now, there were several questions that was brought up, and one was, we were talking about Orpha. Orpha left Naomi and stayed in Moab, and described as going back to her people and her God. And I think she's going to touch on a whole bunch of answers on this. She does a great job on this one tonight. But Naomi clearly considered that Orpha would remarry and continue and secure her life with a new family in her own land, which was with the Moabites. She was not abandoned by Naomi. She was released from her responsibilities to the older lady to have a good life with her family and find a new love. Now, here was the question that kind of arose. We're going to get into where I'm going with this. In the Bible, we hear no more about Orpha, and it is unlikely that Naomi or Ruth or the Hebrew historians knew any more about her. As often happens, ancient history, various legends and folklores have grown up around the subsequent life of Orpha, most linking her with the Philistines, people as ancestors of Goliath of Gath. But there is no reason to suppose there is any truth to this. So it was kind of a folklore thing about her and Goliath and the Philistines and all that stuff. So we're going to put that one to bed right now. And also, let's see, another little thing in trying to get studied up on this, I did a whole lot of studying the genealogy of the different ones that were involved in our story. And I was really intrigued to look at a little bit of Abram before he became Abraham. And one story I ran across, and I don't know if you've heard this story before, but it is in the Torah, in the Genesis I can't say the name. Genesis Rabbah. And there's a story in there about where when they went to Egypt, which he was kind of out of where he should have been, they went to Egypt, and he was under Nimrod. And Nimrod had challenged him, wanted to know why he would not worship his God or his idols, because Nimrod was the king of that time. And Abram was challenged by him, and there's a whole story, but where I'm going with that was, in this story, it said that he was thrown into the fiery furnace. Now, have you heard that, Pastor, that story? Never heard that. Well, it's supposedly it's in Genesis Rabbah, and just a story that I found that interesting because I never heard such a story before, so I looked it up. So, whatever, it could be somewhat folklore too, I guess, but it's a really interesting story because he was challenged and he refused to give in to Nimrod. Well, he goes through the furnace, comes out, and it turns into Abraham and all that stuff. So that's another thing I found. So, I guess.
That was in the Torah?
Yes.
So now, does Torah have?
Are you sure it's in the Torah or the Talmud?
Okay, it says, the story of Abram is in the fiery furnace, is not in the Bible itself, but it's found in the book of Jasher.
Oh, okay.
Jasher. And in some later rabbinic texts like Genesis Rabbah. And these accounts of Abram and Nimrod, and Nimrod was the Babylonian king. That's who he was. And so I just found that interesting because I never heard that story before, that there was another deal. And so you can put that with the Goliath story too. So anyway, so that's where we're at, and she does a great job, so I need to just shut up and let her teach us a little bit. And everybody's got their papers, and so
I failed you.
roll them.
Failed you.
Gone.
I'm fired.
Well, Benji were injured or had work done,
Oh,
we'll excuse,
that gets me out of
we'll excuse you. You want me to do it or can you do it?
While you're looking, I looked this up. The book of Jasher is mentioned in, I guess, Samuel, but it's considered it's not canonical. It's a lost book. It's like folkloric at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. Can you handle it from there?
Yeah.
You might have to turn it up, because I turned it down a little while ago.
Recently, I was introduced to an art form that I had never seen or heard about before. The design of it was so interesting, I knew immediately there had to be an unexpected story behind it. Now, I was just looking at pottery pieces, vases, and bowls, but this particular art form is from Japan, and it's called kintsugi. Now, most of us, if a pottery piece falls to the ground and shatters into multiple pieces, we just throw it in the trash. It's upsetting, but it's broken. It's worthless. But with kintsugi, they take those broken pottery pieces and they put them back together again, and they seal the cracks with liquid gold. It's right there in the name. Ki means golden, and tsugi means repair. Now, these gold veins in this newly crafted pottery piece, they serve three purposes. One, they actually make the piece stronger. It's a lot harder to destroy gold. Second, the gold in this piece now makes the pottery more monetarily valuable than it was before. And third, these veins actually draw attention to the cracks. As in, it draws attention to its brokenness. Now, I know that sounds really counterintuitive. If you've ever tried to super glue something back together again, you know that the goal is to put it together so seamlessly that the cracks are unnoticeable. But that's another unique thing about kintsugi. The philosophy behind it is that you don't want to hide your scars, but they're stories to share. The idea that if you can embrace the brokenness, you might find something beautiful. Now, I don't think I would ever think of a process like that on my own, but I can tell you it's breathtaking. Now, in our first session together, we talked about one of the expectations for coming to the book of Ruth is that it's a story all about love. It's a warm and inviting tale of adoration and affection. But what if it's not just a love story? What if it's also a grief story? What if Naomi is not just a supporting actress here, but what if the story of redemption is written in her wounds? Now, I understand the impatience of wanting to get to the good part, but we would be remiss if we didn't just spend a little bit of time here in these first few verses. We can learn a lot from Naomi's losses. Primarily, if we skip over the gravity of grief, we will miss the impact of the glory of God. So would you open up your Bibles with me and let's turn to Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth." Let's pause here for just a moment. I mentioned in the first session that there are multiple layers to this story, and oftentimes when we think we've got a clear understanding of what's going on, there's actually more to learn. And these first few verses are no exception. We look at this and we just see a list of family names, some of these who aren't even going to make it past the introduction. So should we really care, right? But we should. because these names actually tell us so much about where this story is going. For example, the name Elimelech. It means my God is king. Now, right there in verse 1, we're told that this is the time of the judges, an era where God was king, but the judges ruled on his behalf. But Elimelech's death might be symbolic of the death of this era, because Israel is about to move into a time of human kings, a time where God's rule was not enough for them. Well, next we have the names of the sons, Mahlon and Chilion. These two names have a really close etymology for the words sickness and consumption, a really unfortunate foreshadowing. Then we come to Naomi, and Naomi means pleasant. This is incredibly valuable to know because she's going to undergo a name change by the time we get to the end of the chapter. And knowing what her name means now, this provides for us a depth of meaning to how she sees herself and how she sees her God. Well, Ruth appropriately comes from the word for companion. And even Orpah gets a symbolic name. Hers seems to hint at the Hebrew word for the back of the neck, which might represent the fact that she turned and went back to Moab. So the stage is set. And when you know the language, you see some of where this story is headed, and you can tell already it's going to be a bumpy ride. So let's pick back up where we left off and start in verse 3 again. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons or her husband. Now I know that widowhood is not exactly uncommon. It's always sad, but maybe this just isn't something that makes you raise your eyebrows in concern. Maybe you're part of a strong faith community, and so you've seen widows taken care of by the church. Or shoot, maybe you yourself have been taken care of by a saintly widow. My grandmother is just such a widow. But we have to remember that our culture is different from their culture. And so when we see this phrase, and Naomi was left without her two sons or her husband, this is more than just sad. This is more than just unfortunate. This is absolute and utter devastation. Naomi now has nothing. Anything that belonged to her husband or her two sons would not automatically transfer to her. Women had no status in this time and place. They had nothing of their own, nor did they have the authority to claim anything as their own. And widowhood in old age is even worse. No father to care for you, no sons to take you in, not even a married daughter to possibly take care of your needs. No, there's really only three viable options for Naomi at this point: slavery, prostitution, or death. This is her fate, and she knows it. Perhaps this all feels a bit jarring to you. Maybe you're thinking, I remember an Old Testament law where God said to take care of widows, right? I mean, shouldn't he step in here and do something? And you're not wrong. There are multiple Old Testament laws that talk about how to care for the poor, widows included, but those are laws for the Israelite community. And Naomi's not in the Israelite community. This is why we're about to see her pack her bags and head home. Yes, God cares deeply about the welfare of widows. Please don't hear me say otherwise. We will see that play out in this story. We will see that in the story of Elijah, when he chooses to go to a widow's home and he provides for her a miracle that lasts forever. We see that in the book of Acts when deacons were elected to specifically care for widows. We see that in the book of James. True religion is to care for orphans and widows. And we see it in Jesus. In Luke chapter 7, he raises a widow's only son. The text says, when the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and he touched the bier that they were carrying him on, and the bearer stood still. And Jesus said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." And the dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. You see, knowing this woman's fate and having compassion on her, Jesus raises the son of the widow in name. And in doing so, he resurrected 2 souls that day. Absolutely. God most certainly cares about the well-being of widows. But God also expects his people to care about the well-being of widows. He has given them laws, and he's given them examples to follow. The question for Naomi now is, will they? And so in verses 6 and 7, we see that Naomi has caught wind that conditions back in Judah are much better. The famine has lifted, and since she clearly has nothing in Moab, she thinks it's time for her to return to Bethlehem and try to find provision. And so both Naomi and her daughters-in-law, they prepare to move. But somewhere along the road, Naomi has a change of heart. And right here in verse 8, we have the first of 3 sets of dialogue between these women. Here's what it says. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you find rest in the home of another husband." And then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." Now, this Hebrew word here is the word shuv, and this word really means return. This word is used 12 times in the first chapter of Ruth alone. Now, in our NIVs, we've translated this word to really fit our grammatical structure, and so we'll see it over and over again, but we'll see it take forms like take back, go back, turn back, brought back. But every time it is this word, shuv. And any time a word is used this many times, that's significant. So what does it mean? Well, not only does it denote a physical turning, but sometimes it means a spiritual transformation. That's the way we'll see this word used in verse 16 in Ruth's response to Naomi, and even in Naomi's transformation from empty to full in chapter 4. But I don't want to jump ahead prematurely. So back in verse 8, we see this word twice. It's used as a double imperative for the young women to return and to return home to their mother's home. Now, for those of you who have read decent portions of your Old Testament, maybe this stood out to you. Because traditionally, we see young widows told to return to their father's home, where they can be cared for. But see, Naomi wants more for her daughters-in-law than to just remain widows. No, she wants them to find new husbands, find new life. In fact, there are only 3 other times in all of Scripture where a young widow is told to return to her mother's home, and every time the context is marriage and family. It's true, women didn't have a lot of power in this day, but there was one area where it was understood she had all the power, and that was in childbearing. But clearly, this logic means nothing to these young widows. And Naomi sees that, so she decides to take things to the next level. She gets personal. Verse 11. But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Now, at this point, Naomi is referencing the ancient custom of Levirate marriage. This is the custom that states that a brother of a man who has died without children should marry the widow and give her a son, so that his brother's name will not be blotted out from the history of Israel. Now, we're going to talk more about Levirate marriage in a later session. But for now, what I want you to see is that Naomi is making it clear this is not her reality. She cannot provide a son at this point in her life. And so there's no name to carry on. And if there's no name to carry on, then there's no responsibility to be taken by any of her relatives. In other words, no one is going to provide for her. No one is going to provide for these young women. And so she says again, "Return home. I have nothing but bitterness to offer you." Now, at this point, Orpah listens to reason. She kisses her mother-in-law and she returns to Moab. But Ruth stands fast. The text actually says Ruth clung to her. She was immovable. And perhaps that's why we see Naomi's third try to get her to turn back. It seems to lose a little steam. Look, she's going. You should too. pretty much what it says. Perhaps she knew that she wasn't going to win this battle. And it's true. Ruth now gives a speech of her own, and she declares a loyalty to her mother-in-law, and more significantly, a loyalty to her mother-in-law's God. She will not turn back. And in verse 18, we see Naomi's response to Ruth: silent defeat. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And the language here suggests that these two women traveled on in silence. Now, maybe that was because Naomi was angry with Ruth. Maybe she was exasperated. But you know, it's also possible that her depression, her pain, her trauma was just too unspeakable. Naomi is trying to process devastation over feeling abandoned by God. And this certainly checks out with what happens next in the text. The two travel companions arrive in Bethlehem, and it says that the whole town was stirred because of them. Now, this word for stirred is another place where there's a double meaning. It can mean excitement, that they were genuinely joyful over Naomi's return after so long. But this word can also mean confusion. And in verse 19, the women ask, can this be Naomi? And so it seems that Naomi, who left Bethlehem all those years ago, is not the same Naomi that has returned. She's unrecognizable to her friends, and she is unrecognizable to herself. Grief has brought about such transformation in her that she actually declares a name change. She says, pleasant, this no longer fits. But Mara, the word for bitterness, this is how she sees herself now. And honestly, who can blame her? I mean, right here in the first 5 verses of this story, we are given a laundry list of Naomi's losses. First, she has to leave her home in Bethlehem due to a famine. Ironically enough, Bethlehem is translated house of bread. So that her family goes to Moab, and the text indicates that it was meant to be just a short reprieve, just enough time to regain some of what they lost. But then we see she has been a refugee there for 10 years. Now, I'm not saying that that entire decade was a dark time, but we have plenty of stories of Israelites in exile in our scriptures. We know what that was like for them. We even know what life is like for refugees today, and it's not exactly a dream. Now, within this 10 years, Naomi also becomes a widow, but the bright spot is she still has these 2 young sons. However, the only prospects she has for these sons are Moabites. Now, here's the deal. Every family tree has a shady side, right? Well, the Moabites are the shady side of the Israelite tree. Moabites are descendants of Lot and his incestuous relationship with his daughter. They are enemies of Israel. They worship foreign gods. And even in Deuteronomy 23, we see that it is Mosaic law that prohibits Moabites from Israelite worship to the 10th generation. But listen, not only would Naomi not like her prospects, but who's to say that the prospects wouldn't like Naomi? I mean, we've talked about how Elimelech's family were immigrants. Not only would that have been difficult for them, but it wouldn't have been very appealing for the Moabites. Also, these boys have no father. No father means no wealth, no matter where you come from. And also, no wealth means no high society. And in the Moabite culture, high society was pretty important to a lot of people. So with these odds, it's highly unlikely that Naomi is going to find the cream of the crop for her sons. And yet, it seems like she's done pretty well with the 2 daughters-in-law that she did receive, except for the fact that they remain childless. Now Naomi's line, her family line, is hanging in the balance. And then the lights go completely out. Both of her sons, dead. Historically, connections have been made between Job and Naomi. And it really, is it any wonder? But I have to tell you, I have actually heard people honor Job but criticize Naomi. Now that to me is a wonder. It's almost like we have this idea that Job is this long-suffering saint, but that Naomi is just a faithless whiner. But that's not how either of their stories go. In fact, commentator Robert Hubbard, he points out that Naomi uses legal language here. It portrays her as a defendant in some kind of legal action, and she's already been found guilty, and she's been punished, but she hasn't yet been told what she did wrong. Verse 21 says this, Yahweh has afflicted me, or testified against me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. And interestingly, Job says something really similar in Job 27. As surely as God lives, who has denied me justice, the Almighty, who has made me taste bitterness of soul. There it is. He says, as long as I have life within me, the breath of God in my nostrils, my lips will not speak wickedness, and my tongue will utter no deceit. Now, the end of Job's declaration here does give us the picture that he is accepting his fate, even if he doesn't understand it. That he has to believe there is a purpose that he cannot see. And honestly, I think Naomi is in much the same space. She is baffled by these consequences. She is angered over these losses. She's a bit hopeless that there could be any other ending than the one that she has already resolved herself to. But both Job and Naomi recognize this truth. God is still God. And faith, it may desire an answer, but it cannot be dependent upon one. In these moments, God's people are asked to remember that God has kept his promises in the past, and he has made promises for the future. And so even if Naomi finds herself at a present impasse, she is going to continue to practice her faith as best she can. And friends, that's all any of us can do. In his book, Lament for a Son, Nicholas Wolterstorff, he describes his grief through a set of images. He talks about light being replaced with darkness and presence replaced by absence. But as he wrestled through his devastation, he entered into a deeper connection with God than he thought possible. And in the end, he remarked that his grief wasn't going anywhere, but it was beginning to mean something. This is what he says. I shall now look at the world through tears, and perhaps I shall see things that dry-eyed I could not see. So as we kind of close our time together today, can I just remind you of something? We have a tendency to define hope as wishful thinking. I hope I get the job. I hope my team wins. If you're one of my students, I hope I pass this test that I didn't bother studying for. Wishful thinking. But we have to remember, it is imperative for our faith that we remember our reward isn't on this earth and it isn't in this life. Our hope is not temporary and it's certainly not wishful thinking. Our hope is found in a certain expectation because our hope is found in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Jesus' resurrection means for us that we no longer fear persecution or trials or suffering of any kind. Because every time we go through something difficult, we simply ask ourselves this question: what's the worst thing that could happen? The answer? Death. But death no longer paralyzes us because we know we will follow Jesus straight through death and into life. This is a hope that nothing can extinguish. And this is a theology that we must passionately practice in moments of peace and prosperity so that we are unwavering in moments of grief. Don't call me Naomi, she said. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Mara. This is also a reminder. It's a reminder for the original audience and a reminder for us of the place called Mara in Exodus chapter 15. The place where the Israelites tasted bitter water when they had great need. Bitter water that eventually became sweet. The story is not over. It's not over for Naomi, and it's not over for you. So my prayer today is that your grief would lead you straight to the comforting arms of Christ. And when you just meditate on these words from 2 Corinthians 4:17, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Be blessed. I'll see you next time.
Some quick takeaways that I out of this wonderful story that we get, and we're just now getting into some of the vessels yet to come. One of the things I got to thinking about in the story about Naomi is the fact she evidently had a strong belief in God when they went to be in Moab, because she changed a young woman named Ruth to follow her God instead of following the Moabites' way of life and living. So Naomi must have had a great witness, even in the circumstances of losing her husband, losing her children. She had a great witness for Ruth. And so that's why Ruth clung to her. And that's why Ruth's sister was still stuck with the Moabite way of life and was going to willing to stay there. But Ruth knew that there was something better for her. And the other part of that too is one of the major reasons, as she talked about, the fate of Naomi knew if she stayed in Moab, she faced those three things: slavery, prostitution, or death. But she knew in Deuteronomy and Leviticus the promise of widows that was made. And we've seen in the New Testament what Jesus did for the widow and raised her son back to life. So that great promise existed too. But that's why Naomi was going to go back home to Bethlehem, because she knew she had a better chance for life. She knew that the Jewish law at that time would have said that they got to take care of her. And we'll even read more about how the kinsman redeemer, when we get to chapter 4, about how he does redeem that situation. Let's see. I looked up that one scripture she referenced in Exodus in 15:22 through 23, where she took the name of the Mara. It was that place of bitterness and bitter water. So when you listen to that, the second question now, review the list of Naomi's losses. Which parts do you find particularly difficult to fathom? When you talk about that list, remember what our list was: famine, a refugee for 10 years, a widow. The Moabites hated the Israelites, so she was in an area where she would have been hated, and childless, and lost her sons as well through that. So how do you think, in reviewing that list of Naomi's losses, which parts do you find particularly difficult to fathom? Well, some of you already experienced losing a child, and so some of you already know what that's like. And it's not ever easy to give up. So that would be one of my things I'm thinking about. But when you think about it too, right now, where our country's going right now, we're kind of living in the Moabite land right now, it seems like. And we've got a lot of work to do. And I guess, again, that's why Naomi had to shine a little bit for God, even in a bad situation, which that's our lesson, that we have to shine. And so we have to do that as well.
She kind of, in general, was at a place where she just, like, her life had absolutely not turned out anything at all like she envisioned it would 5, 10, 15, 20 years previous. She had an idea what it was going to be like when she was younger. She got married. Someday I'm going to have kids. Someday they'll have kids. I'll be grandma, all this stuff. And at this point in the story, none of that has come true, and she's having to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's even hard for 3 women to go out on their own and walk that far, too.
Right. And, you know, again, I mean, God has the great influence in, evidently either through his power to Ruth to realize she needs to cling to Naomi. Naomi needed Ruth to help her make the comeback. Of course, we're going to lose Naomi here pretty soon. It's going to all go to Ruth and Boaz. But there's a lot of great story coming yet. And so that's what we'll see. But again, the relationship between Naomi and, I guess, mother-daughters, whatever, daughter-in-laws, what a great influence you can have on those people to influence them. That's why your relationship is so important to be a witness for those that's under you, your daughters and your daughters-in-laws and those. Okay, anything else from this first chapter? It's a great story. It's a great story, and it's got great reasons that we have it. And anything you want to say? Okay, I'm going to pass out cards, and we'll do our drawing for prayer requests. If you're still okay with that. If you have something to say, just say it. Just come on. What did you say, Carmine? Your lips are moving, but I can't make out the words. I don't get my hearing aids till the 30th.
Sign language.
Doesn't receive here.
And somebody, well, I guess I've got this off. All right. Kathleen, will you pick them up for me? Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Kathy.
That get plans. Is he still writing his name?
Jeopardy song.
Okay. Forget some?
I folded some aren't.
Especially on paper. I'll get everybody to draw. Probably mine, just draw mine while you're here. I'll tell you. That's amazing. I got him mine. I must need 3-4 minutes for it.
I guess. Shuffle them, yeah.
Okay, when you get your name drawn, go find that person and find out what they need to be prayed for the week. Okay? Thanks.
Yeah, some of them folded, some of them weren't. So.
Nope, never mind, I got moved.
That one's yours, Rosie. I'll take that.
I have not remembered what
Happy?
You got your own? I think it's rules.
It's probably in the garden.
No, I don't have a garden because the varmints always eat it. It didn't really go very deep, but it kind of bit it in and dug it out and. This probably on Burch too. Yes, yeah.
All that, all that.
Wait,
Did we have each other?
No fish, you're not getting any fish.
I have no
Okay, Rosie.
Let's get the list on this.